The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, welcome everybody. This is Chris Nealand. Just getting ready to kick off our webinar. Just wanted to do a quick gut check and make sure that all the audio and video is working for everyone. Everybody's phones have been muted, so we'll be using sort of the question and answer question on the right. So why don't you go ahead and type something in there that will both let me know that you can hear me, as well as confirm that you'll be able to access that panel when we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Got Tammy or Nick or Karen. Yeah, thank you. Just chime in. All right. Thanks for joining. This is just kind of an ongoing series as part of Cult's Enlightenment series, where we every other month or so try to expose you to some of the things that we're working on, some of the things that we're seeing our clients struggling with, or some of the opportunities that we think the marketplace, that we think are very topical for the marketplace. And today is going to be centered around a wildly popular topic right now of engagement, but probably a less popular, less understood topic of measuring engagement. And so we couldn't really have handpicked a better MC or host for today, which is going to be Marc Whitehead. He's going to take us on an exciting journey of the world of engagement, what it is, why it's important, and how to measure it. And you know, Marc joined our team right around Christmas time of last year. And what I was so excited about Marc in terms of his capability is that he brings a lot more science to sometimes something that we might deem a little too much art. We have a lot of opinions, we have a lot of philosophies, we have a lot of principles. Marc has a career that has devoted himself to proof and devoted himself to measurable impact, and has devoted himself to asking better questions in hopes of getting better answers. So Marc will be sharing some of the great brands and some of the great work that he's done throughout this 30-minute webinar. So I'll spare you a long and rambling bio, but I consider Colt very lucky to have Marc on our team, and I think you guys are lucky to have Marc take you through his thoughts on brand engagement. So really, with no further ado, Marc, I'm assuming we can hear you. Give us a quick sound check.
I hope you can hear me. Otherwise, it would be a pretty crummy webinar.
Yeah, good. Well, we're going to turn the time over to you and hope that you can maybe start this whole thing off by really helping us understand what you mean by audience engagement, and why do you think this is sort of the one metric to rule above all others.
Great. And thanks again, Chris, for facilitating this webinar. And it's something, as you say, that I'm passionate about and excited to be a part of Cult and where we're headed in this. And, you know, to the question about what audience engagement is, I would say probably about 3 years ago in a formal sense, and probably as far long ago as a decade in an informal sense, that this has been a topic of fascination for me and of interest to me. And I know I've got at least one ex-client on the line who I talked years ago about this whole topic of the idea of engagement. And so, you know, as we've tried to move towards, you know, what is it and how can we measure it, I think there's still an awful lot of confusion about what engagement is. And I wrote a white paper. If any of you on the webinar haven't read it yet, go to cultideas.com and download it, and it's even more fodder for this conversation. But certainly when I talk with a lot of marketers, they tend to think of engagement in a behavioral sense. And even as recently as last Sunday, I was on a fairly high-profile marketing podcast, and there was a panelist there from a broadcaster who talked about good engagement and bad engagement. In his opinion, bad engagement was people liking a Facebook page about a show, and good engagement was people watching the show, and then on the other side of it, sharing how much they enjoyed the show. And I completely understand and respect why he said it like that, because there has been so much confusion about engagement. But I had to stop him and say, in my opinion, engagement is not a behavior. Behavior can and should happen as a result of engagement, but really engagement is more about the commitment that a person feels towards a brand. That's based on shared beliefs and really a heightened level of attachment to that brand and an advocacy that they feel, that results in a behavior that is a mutually beneficial behavior, that's beneficial for the audience member, and I would say that is equally beneficial for the brand. So this idea that there's a win-win on both sides of the equation. And I've been involved in the research and insights area of my career for a long time, and my experiences with other metrics over the years have been kind of frustrating, because an awful lot of them are not leading indicators, but not roadmaps for where you could take this information and go forward, as much as they were lagging. And more frustrating, not a lot of them were actionable. Sometimes you would get a hint of some things, but they weren't very actionable. And way too often, I think a lot of research studies are created around proving hypotheses that either the client or the agency, or maybe both of them, have in a marketing sense about a brand or a message, or maybe in a product sense about the positioning of that product. And they're not enough about learning the best way forward. I think too much research is around execution and not enough around strategy. And so that's why I've pursued this idea of how can we not only understand and articulate what engagement is, but how can we find a way to actually measure it and understand exactly how to use that information in an actionable way.
Yeah, I like that, Mark. I think we've talked a lot about it's kind of true. Marketers are pretty good at what they do, and if the adage is what gets measured gets done, I think we could both agree that marketers are doing a lot of things that will improve the metrics that they're using. I think we're just contending they're probably measuring the wrong things. So as we think about brand preference or likability or net promoter score, et cetera, why do you believe that this audience engagement metric would have strengths that those other ones overcomes those other ones?
Sure. So, an awful lot of those other, and I talk about it in the white paper, a lot of the other methodologies are very much around trying to understand how whatever is happening is connected to a behavior. Maybe it's a behavior of a transaction, maybe it's a behavior on social media of activity, but let me just kind of talk about a few of them and how they work and what their strengths are, and in my opinion, sort of what the weaknesses are. So, likability is something that I've had experience with for decades, and it's been around for certainly a lot longer than I've been in the business. And a lot of people talk about likability as sort of a metric of trust. How trustworthy is this brand in your opinion that you are going to not only like it, but you are going to advocate about that likability. And I've even seen some organizations that have kind of deconstructed the word trust to represent what they call the 5 key measures of likability, which is truth, relevance, unselfishness, simplicity, and timing. And so that's their worldview of what likability is altogether about. And if you can understand that in some kind of research, that could be interesting information for you. But I've been in far too many focus groups. I mean, I can think of one in particular for a significant chewing gum brand in the marketplace, where people are looking at what is, in fact, not even a finished commercial. They're looking at either a rip-o-matic or an animatic or something that is sort of like a cartoonish version of the commercial, and they're being asked to indicate their degree of liking the message at a point in time throughout the 30 seconds that they are sitting there and watching it. And it's impossible to not note how this bears no resemblance to how people actually consume and react to content. And so, marketers, again, that's in my opinion, an example of a client who has a theory or an execution of a theory on a strategy, and really what they're trying to do is get some confidence that their hypothesis is right. So that, in my opinion, is kind of flawed. You can move on to talk about and likability. The other downside of likability, in my opinion, is that it's kind of considered in the old marketing funnel. The one that's up on the screen here is one version. Another one, probably more commonly known as AIDA, awareness, interest, desire, and action. Like there's a linear process that people go through to make a decision about engaging and ultimately purchasing a product. And again, I don't think that there's a connection between the idea of understanding likability as part of that funnel and how that can actually move people in a literal way towards engaging in the brand. NPS is one that we talk a lot about with clients because there's a high degree of familiarity. A lot of Fortune 500 companies use NPS, and really it's wonderfully simple. It asks the question, how likely is it that you would recommend whatever is the brand in question to a friend or colleague? And you're given a scale, and if you mark it as a 9 or a 10, you're viewed as a promoter. If you mark it as a 6 or lower, you're viewed as a detractor. In a 7 or 8, that's just neither, I would call it indifference or some degree of indifference. And then they have a simple little math equation that says you subtract the detractors from the promoters and you get an NPS score. And again, I don't find the NPS approach, Bain has, the consultancy has built a business out of this idea and how they've used it in a lot of work, but I don't see it as actionable in the way that I would love to see it actionable. It gives you what I would call a vanity score. And I remember just last year being at a conference for a regional retail chain, and one of the slides they had in their marketing section was about how their NPS score was as high as, or almost as high as, Amazon's. Wild cheers in the audience, and they were all excited about it. But really, what does that mean? And how do you action that information? You're not understanding the ingredients of what got you to that NPS score. Another one that's commonly talked about is brand attachment. And if I read you the description of what brand attachment typically is and looks like, you would think I would be reading some kind of intellectual argument about the way people connect with a brand. And this is just one of a number of different charts that express the idea. Here they call it the meaningful brand index, but that is about your attachment to the brand on a number of different dimensions. And again, not as actionable as I think this kind of information should be, and really is seen as more of an academic exercise that is about the rear view mirror of where the brand has been, as much as looking out the windshield about where it could be. So in studying just and talking just about some of these, that was the spark for me to say there's got to be something better. There's got to be something more actionable and more meaning and more a predictor of future success as a lagging indicator of what's happened, and that's why we created AES.
Yeah, so let's just kind of in the interest of time, I'll ask the audience to sort of suspend any further disbelief that there are some fundamental flaws with the audience engagement metrics of yesteryear, and humor us for the next 20 minutes as we try to expose you to a new way that not only asks better questions, but it can give you something more actionable upon which to spend your discretionary dollars. So let's dive into the AES score, Mark.
Yeah, so quickly, AES really started with this book. I read a number of books, but this book was really sort of got me thinking about it. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read it. Gerald Zaltman wrote it a number of years ago, and he was at Harvard. And this book was the most eloquent, in my opinion, expression of this concept that a number of books have written about, that 95% or as much as 95% of purchase decisions are made subconsciously with your emotion and then are rationalized after the fact. And if that's the case, really trying to understand what are those drivers, the feelings and the beliefs that people hold that are driving their most meaningful meaningful behaviors that are really what would be great and important to study. And I just put this slide in because it just reminds me of another story when I spoke with a QSR a couple of years ago, and they were talking to me about, for them the most meaningful measure of success, again behavioral, was about foot traffic. And I told them that, in my opinion, we could increase foot traffic dramatically tomorrow by putting some amazing coupon out in the marketplace and getting a lot of people to come into your store. But if they did that and they got your food and they had a great experience and they left, but with no more greater feelings of engagement around the feelings and beliefs they have of your brand, then you got to spend that money all over again to get them back. And if instead we could start to think of taking a portion of that spend and starting to do other things, maybe it's something in the store that has nothing to do with marketing, or certainly maybe it's part of the messaging to get them in the store in the first place, that helps them feel stronger about you or feel more connected to a belief about your brand that resonates with them, they would feel more engaged. And in my opinion, engagement is the predisposition that's going to result in some kind of a behavior. And over a period of time, you can stop doing all this activity or certainly do a lot less of it. I do want to give a nod to Nick Bond, who's been my sort of partner in crime in doing all this thinking around modeling what would something that we call AES, audience engagement scoring, what could it look like? And how can we do it in a way that doesn't just provide a vanity score, but that is, truly diagnostic and truly actionable and truly predictive?
So talk about how that actually works. I get that everybody would say, yeah, those predictive behaviors would be more desirable, but how can it be as simple as a net promoter score?
So what we've done, and this is kind of the simplest way to present the idea behind it, is we ask a set of questions to an audience member, and it could be an external audience member, could be internal. Sometimes AAS is a great tool for understanding how to build better engagement within your company, not just externally. And we help them reveal to us what are their emotional feelings and what are their rational beliefs about that brand, and how likely are those going to result in a set of behaviors. So as I say, it's done with typically current supporters of the brand or the company and the organization, not so much prospective customers who may not know that much about the brand. It's done in a way with questions similar to what you might experience if you've done a personality profiling exercise, where we are asking questions that help people reveal their feelings and beliefs. And then we take that information and we filter it in a way that helps us understand not only the attitudes of the entire universe of respondents, but we're looking for clusters of those respondents that represent the future success of the client. So when we do that, it gives us a lot of diagnostic data on the current state of the client. Where are you right now? What are the most important feelings and beliefs that are driving the success that you're having so far? But which are the areas that you need to consider improving going forward? So as much as I appreciate you talking about me being a bit of a data scientist, really this is as much about getting some quantitative data connected to qualitative thinking that is the ingredients for people to use to do something with. Maybe it is develop a message and you still have a core proposition, but now you understand a specific feeling or a specific belief that you are underrepresenting in your messaging, that your opportunity audience is actually craving. And if they heard it, and if they believed it, or if they felt it, they would feel more engaged in your brand. So it's little bits and pieces of clues from this. It's not a panacea of all the answers, but it is bits and pieces of information that's going to help you do better work down the road.
And so I get the part about, but aren't they still indicating this is how I feel today? So what's
Absolutely.
the predictive part of it that will say, here's how I'll feel tomorrow?
So there's one particular way that we do this best, and it is when, and again, a lot of research that I've experienced, typically a brand says, I want to know where we stand, and I want to know where my one or two main competitors stand, so that I can make some decisions about how I can compete against them. We believe it is more important, or certainly as important, that we study what we call the ideal non-existent in the category. So if we're gonna, I'm just gonna pick somebody out of this imagery here, you know, Home Depot. So Home Depot might typically say, I want to know what Lowe's is all about, and where their feelings and beliefs that their most loyal customers have, and how they differ from ours. What we would want to know is, what's the ideal, you know, home renovation, do-it-yourself retailer? What does it look like? It doesn't exist right now. Tell me what it looks like. And on the dimensions in which we are understanding feelings and beliefs, that can provide a brand like the Home Depot with much more guidance on the white space that's available for them to take, that none of their competitors have right now, than if you were just simply studying your competitors, because in many, many ways you have no control over what your competitors are going to do. And I think it also provides some relevance in the information. So if we find out, for example, that, you know, honesty is getting a 7.7 out of 10 score, but the most that you can expect in this particular category is an 8.2, then there's not as necessarily as huge an opportunity to increase that as if there was a wider gap. So sometimes it helps you understand that even though you feel as though your number is not as high as it should be on a dimension of feeling or belief, that you're in a pretty good place right now. And there are other areas that you should pay more attention to and look to increase in better and different ways.
So I know you just kind of picked Home Depot randomly from this chart of brands that claim high levels of engagement. Can you walk us through a real world example of somebody you've worked with to do something to change their paradigms around engagement?
Sure. And I can't tell you the specific client, although the client has blessed me in sharing this slide whenever we have a conversation, but we did some work with a post-secondary education institution in Canada, and they had engaged us because they wanted to understand how prospective students, what they were going through, what process were they going through, and how were they making the decisions. And what I'm showing you here is a journey map, basically, an audience engagement path that has a lot of information in it, and I'm sure the type is too small for anybody who's viewing it unless they got it on a big screen to read a lot of this information. But what it basically provides us with, and this comes from the research, is the literal touch points of the journey they take from, I don't know this university at all, to now I'm starting to have conversations with it, to now I'm considering it, and now maybe I've put in an application, to I've actually chosen to go to this university. But as importantly for us is to know, what are their emotional expectations at each one of those stages? How frequently are each one of those stages in part of the process? Do they loop back and do them multiple times? Who is influencing outside of themselves some of those particular touch points? And how well is this particular brand doing at each one of those touch points? So I'm not going to go through all of the data that is here, but I can tell you that the findings that came from this helped us understand how, for example, to tell profiles of students who were either at the university or who had graduated from the university differently than they had done it previously. Much more demonstrable of their connection to feeling like part of a community, because that was a big driver in the decision of which post-secondary institution you're going to choose. Is, do I feel like I'm going to fit in that situation? Another big bugaboo for them in particular was around educating prospective students on finance options and how they could take advantage of certain grants and other things to be able to pay for their tuition. So we changed the way that we communicated that. What I've been talking about so far is all around marketing activities, but another great part of what came out of this was talking with their their salespeople, for lack of a better word, their international salespeople, and we changed the way they conducted presentations, or we suggested how they needed to change the way they did presentations and be much more active listeners, and in fact listen for certain clue words or phrases or thoughts that could be an opportunity for them to not just sit in front of 20 students and leave it up to the students to decide who might find this university of interest, but for the university to single out the 1 or 2 students that they felt were a good fit for the university as well. And after the session was over, have more focused conversations with them to try and answer specific questions and get them over the hump. So there's a great opportunity for AES and some of the way that we use that information in things like a journey map to be able to provide some fodder that not only in this case the assignment was really to address the marketing materials and marketing activities, but to in a broader sense be able to affect operational issues and the way they bring the product to market and how they staff people and how they answer the phones and answer questions that are posted, and how they use social media perhaps in a different way, understanding in a vertical sense how a social media platform needs to work well, but in a horizontal sense and in part of the continuum of a journey, how it needs to understand what happened before they arrived at that Twitter post or that Facebook post, and where does the brand, where would they prefer the relationship to get deeper on the other side of it? Are you wanting an audience member to lean in a certain way with a specific touch point that you think will help deepen engagement?
It's a good example. I particularly like the fact, in my mind, the audience engagement scoring is kind of a 1-2 punch with turning into audience engagement pathing or mapping. I'm a part of a lot of companies that will be doing research projects that really end with kind of a gigantic thud of so what? It's now that we know this, our behaviors aren't changing in any meaningful way. We might make the logo bigger, we might make the copy a little bit softer, but this feels far more substantive in regards to there's a whole host of thinking, feeling, doing that can be informed throughout the not just the pre-purchase, but it looks like you have on this chart also have purchase and post-purchase behaviors that improve the way that people feel engaged. So I like that. If I'm understanding you correctly, and if our audience has been able to follow along, we're saying first and foremost, every organization should be running and measuring itself with a set of KPIs. And we have some concerns about a lot of the KPIs that businesses are doing, not because they're bad KPIs. They are actually measuring things like awareness or preference or acquisition, but those are not the end-all be-all state of what businesses should be aspiring for. What the businesses want are hyper-engaged customers, and yet they're not measuring engagement. And so I think point A that you're making here is there is a way to measure engagement. It's admittedly a bit complicated. I don't know if in this 30 minutes or so we've demystified it as much as we've shared that there's something that exists, and smart people can deploy short, fairly low-cost surveys or questionnaires that will arrive at a different metric that is not only a better indication of engagement today, but it's also a better predictor of if you then changed these things, you could have better engagement in the future as well. So I think I got that first part right, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other point I would make is that, you know, one of my beliefs is, and I'm sure this is shared by a number of folks who are on the webinar, that, you know, marketing has changed from what used to be really a monologue, where there were limited, you know, media outlets, and the marketers had much more control over everything, including their perception in the marketplace, because the internet didn't exist for people to moan and complain about or attack brands. And it's changed to now it needs to be much more of a conversation and a dialogue. And so, you know, this is helping marketers, in my opinion, understand the other side of the table and the kinds of conversations that are important to the audience members. Marketers need to move out of thinking that what they need to say and what they want to say is important because they think it's important, and understand and listen to and be on the side of the audience in listening to themselves, kind of like talk in the mirror, and listen to what you're saying. You know, there's a saying I have, argue like you're right, but listen like you're wrong. I think there needs to be a little bit of that in marketing activities today, because that's where engagement is going to be built. When there is trust, when there is honesty, when there is a sense of forgiveness and a preparedness to forgive you if you make a mistake as a marketer, because they do, there are other values that they have associated with you that are the bedrock of the relationship with you. And above them all is they feel as though there's a peer situation between the brand and the customer. The brand is not above the customer, nor is it necessarily below the customer. It's a peer with the customer. And there is this sense of, just as I said at the very beginning, win-win. We're in it not just to sell, have you compromise something as a customer within your world in order to buy me, nor am I necessarily bribing you to get in my circle to try and influence you further. There's a real sense of value that both parties receive as a result of the brand understanding what are the engagement factors that are going to have an audience member lean into a brand. What are the feelings they have or want to have with you, and what is their belief system currently, or what would they like it to be in the future, that can be the bedrock for you to build engagement with that customer.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a little bit about some of the flaws of other KPIs, as they're very much rear view mirror. They're where you've been. They're not predictive of where you're going. But what I like about what you're talking about, particularly in this post-secondary example, is it's not just predictive, it's also prescriptive. The way that you provide the score, it almost has intuitive next steps in regards to areas of improvement, from product offering, storytelling, media options, etc. So it's just it's a harder working metric that I think marketers would be able to make more immediate and tangible next steps from. Mark, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, let's assume I believe everything that you're saying, that I want to replace my existing metrics with an audience engagement score. I've now done the scoring and I've adjusted my marketing behavior accordingly. Am I done? Is it case closed, or is there a next step after that?
Well, what a leading question. Not at all. You know, it's as important as it is, certainly if you're going to use it in a predictive sense, you need to view it as an opportunity to create benchmarking and then monitor the success of whatever activities you are doing in the marketplace on an ongoing basis. So certainly you need to identify, and I've grabbed this from another consultancy group just because I think it wonderfully explains the 4 keys of benchmarking. You need to have specific objectives that come hopefully from some kind of information you already have, some kind of intelligence you already have about what you want to achieve. And then you need to do some kind of an AES-like exercise where you are collecting and analyzing data that is giving you a sense of the clues for how you can achieve those objectives going forward. And then you need to implement whatever kind of activity you put in place. Make sure that there's a strong strategic foundation for it, but also understand how you're tactically executing that strategy. And then you need to evaluate on an ongoing basis how you are achieving your success and whether you are actually setting a new benchmark in light of whatever's going on in the marketplace. It could be your success, it could be a competitor's success, it could be a new entrant, it could actually be the way a customer redefines the category you think you're playing in. And so there is, you need to continually, real-time marketing is a real thing. It's no longer, let me do some strategic thinking, create a television commercial, throw it on air for 13 weeks, and at the end of 13 weeks, look at how sales were impacted. Especially if you believe in the idea of a lifetime customer relationship, you need to continually be conversing with them. And there's lots of great research companies, like Chaotix and others that do that as well, that build communities where you can have ongoing conversations with them. We just believe AES is a great foundational set of data that you can use in those instances. So yeah, I will say I talked a little bit about both the pros and cons of some of the other metrics. I'm by no means say stop all those and embrace AES. I'm just saying that I think AES is a new and different way to be able to look at and measure specifically engagement. What does engagement look like? What does the ideal engagement look like between you and the customers that you value and that you want to build your business on? And how can you learn from what that looks like to continually nurture that relationship and build strong and enduring success down the road?
Mark, we've got just a handful of minutes here left, and I always like to open some things up for questions because it's tough. It's tough to know if people are picking up what we're putting down here. So if you're listening and want to get some clarifying questions, please go to the questions tab there on the control panel and submit something. Mark, one of the things that I think sometimes clients roll their eyes at when we say we need to go, is this just another flavor of the month? Here's another thing that I'm supposed to be doing. I think you've done a particularly good job of not making this either cost prohibitive or time prohibitive, where we say, give me $500,000 in 12 months and I'll come back with some answers. Can you just riff a little bit on how easily can this kind of stuff be implemented?
Sure. So it can be done as easily and simply as a about 3-minute questionnaire of 8 to 10 questions that gets a sort of very simple and basic sense of the feelings and beliefs that are driving specific behaviors, and it sort of goes up from there. In a cost standpoint, we can do an AES assignment for as little as $20,000. Again, that would be a snapshot opportunity, and I think that's fine maybe for a sort of a dipping the toes in the water for someone to understand it. I wouldn't necessarily encourage marketers to do that and that's it. I think you need, as we say here on the benchmarking slide, to continually get involved and use that information. And then we have more extensive, slightly longer and with more question versions of it that enable us to do some outputs like personas and journey mapping, and that's all part of a secondary project or protocol that we call AIM, which is audience intersection mapping. How do we find those intersection points between the profile of the most important audiences and the profile of the brand, and the journey that the audience is taking and the journey that the brand is taking in bringing their products and services to market? And what are those inflection points that if we learn a little bit more about what engagement could look like in those instances, we could get better engagement as a result? And I was going to say, I'm not sure how many questions we're getting, but if you're either confused or interested and want to learn more, I know that Jordy wanted me to flip up this slide and say, if you're on this, and this is only being offered to people who are attending this webinar, and you want to connect with Jordy in the next 24 hours before we go off on Canada Day long weekend up here in Canada, we'd be happy to give you a more in-depth 20-minute one-on-one consultation where Jordy and I will get on the phone with you and answer any specific questions you have, take you in more detail through exactly how this works and how it could work for you. And I also want to say this, you don't need to be a marketer to do this. Certainly I'm having a lot of conversations with service businesses who have their own clients but are struggling with the idea of measuring in a quantitative sense a lot of qualitative activities and feelings that people have. So you could have a client that this could be perfect for and could help you in the work you're doing with them to bring some KPIs that are maybe a little bit different than the KPIs you've used with them before to help you prove how the work you're doing with them is actually moving the needle on engagement.
You kind of just slipped in here this idea of aim, and I don't want to make a complicated topic more complicated with the two different acronyms that are both three letters and start with the word A. But you have AES, which I think you're saying is kind of where you start. That's the foundational part that lets you, A, it gives you a benchmark, and B, it lets you know what people are thinking, feeling, doing now, and what they'd like to be thinking, feeling, doing in the future. But then you mentioned AIM. Is that similar to the post-secondary journey map that you showed us, or is that a completely different thing?
So it is for sure a journey map exercise would be a part of every AIM engagement. It is not always an output of AES, depends on the extent to which AES gets done. But the way that I would distinguish the two is AES is kind of like the heart monitor or the pulse of how the brand is doing and what engagement it looks like. And then AIM is really about a more fulsome diagnostic of the person, of the brand as person, and you know, some very specific ideas about how all of that learning can and should turn into an engagement plan. You know, one of the things that I'm pleased that differentiates our agency, our firm, from other agencies and even other consultancies is even the language that we use, which is very specific around you know, people who are tasked with the work that we do with clients. We have engagement managers. We don't have account managers. We're not managing accounts. What we're doing is we're managing or trying to have an impact on the engagement that customers are having with our clients. That's our job, and these are the kinds of tools that we believe can help us do a better job of that.
Mark, there's some questions here about the data collection aspect of it. Where is the data collected? How is it collected? Is it from audience? Is it from customers or the general population? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So ideally, we use a database that the client has of their customers. That is our first stop. And so they have that data, and we simply implement an online survey, and the responses from those surveys go back to the client. So therefore, there's no issues around privacy and things like that. And then we use the tool, the filter tools, to be able to take all that data and start to look at it and analyze it in certain ways. There are some instances, we just got a new gig last week with a client that is so omnipresent in the marketplace that we can talk with anybody. Anybody would know who and what this brand is all about, and so we'll use a Gen Pop list. And so in those instances, there are some additional costs to access those lists that are already pre-cleared through privacy laws to be able to use. But it really ideally what we want to do is understand, for those people who already have a relationship with you, what does the engagement look like? A, with the people who are most loyal to you, and B, with the people who show the capacity to be more loyal to you, but just something is not quite there yet. Maybe your message isn't quite right. Maybe your product isn't tweaked or served up, or maybe you're not even available where they'd like to get you. And so we study and cluster the answers around those two audiences, so we can understand from the loyal audience, how do we make sure that we don't do anything to disrupt the relationship we have with them, but really we focus on that opportunity audience. How can we make them more loyal? So typically, you know, it's a long-winded answer to your question. We want to use a list that you have already of your customers. It's an online survey.
I think we have time for one last question. Mark, if you were working with a brand that already was benefiting from tremendous emotional engagement, people were aware of you, they liked you, they bought into your ethos, but yet it still wasn't translating into either, you know, web traffic or store sales or nonprofit donations. The behavior, the desired monetary behavior was lacking. How would something like AES be able to help figure out how to change that?
Well, it would make the connection. It would provide you the information to make the connection or the disconnection between the strong feelings and beliefs they have with you and the behaviors that they are or are not taking. But I'll add one more where I thought you were going to take the question is there are some brands who say, I have amazing loyalty, I have amazing engagement. And so why do I need this? If those brands can demonstrate that they understand why they have amazing engagement, then that's great. I have not experienced any of those. So typically, with a brand that is doing exceedingly well, you would use this to understand why you're doing exceedingly well, so that you can make sure that you continue to do exceedingly well. And you may say, well, how many examples are there of that? I immediately think of Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons had amazing engagement with Canadians for decades. And in a period of the last 2 years, they've lost it. And had they done AES 2 years ago, they might have had the clues that they needed to make sure that they did not disrupt that relationship and the engagement they had with their customers.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you sharing some of your expertise with us. I thank those in attendance for sharing some of their valuable time and attention. Please do email Jordy if there's additional clarification that we can provide, and stay tuned for in August our next Enlightenment Series invitation. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
All right. Thanks, man. That went smooth.